And I now give the floor to His Excellency Artak Aptonian, Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs of Armenia.
Mr. Chairman, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to convey our appreciation to the government of Argentina, not only for the hospitality and excellent organization of the conference, but also for leading the process of Buenos Aires Plan of Action since its inception and adoption in 1978. Today, as we mark the 40th anniversary of this important milestone for South-South cooperation, we share hope that our collective deliberations will continue to identifying new platforms and channels for inclusive partnerships at all levels, national, regional, and global, to tap into the enormous potential of the South-South cooperation. 4 decades ago, the UN member states gathered here to discuss the ways to reinforce and streamline their cooperation based on the fundamental concept of solidarity among peoples and countries. Since then, the world of international development, along with the global context surrounding it and the challenges, opportunities it entails, has become much more complex, in particular for the middle-income countries, who are developed enough to nurture more complex institutions, yet still need longer time and more focused efforts to do so without assistance. It is important to highlight, however, that the middle-income countries have a fundamental capacity to contribute to poverty reduction, global stability, and global growth by being not merely consumers, but also important providers of development. They have enormous potential in contributing to the global development cooperation efforts, including in terms of technology transfer and capacity building, important priorities of the South-South cooperation framework. The UN and its development system have a key role to play in facilitating and accelerating opportunities and helping the developing countries leap forward beyond the traditional mainstream development cooperation. At the 2015 UN Milestone Summit, we made a collective pledge that no one will be left behind. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development Goals outlines a global comprehensive framework for cooperation on all levels, helping to forge effective partnerships and networks and stimulating our actions over the next decades. Ladies and gentlemen, in Armenia, we are working to ensure compatibility and coherence of our national priorities with the Sustainable Development Goals, a far-reaching comprehensive process that ensures the synergy with the ambitious reform agenda of the Armenian government, which is triggered by the decisive political transformation and the profound democratic changes manifested through the Velvet Revolution in Armenia, and supported by the broad public trust and strong mandate. Particular attention of the government is devoted to the creation and development of knowledge-based platforms that embrace the innovation agenda as an important tool for the acceleration of the SDGs and in advancing what we see as a smart development of the country. We are happy to note that the Armenia's model of partnership with the UNDP already serves as a scalable pilot in accordance with the country's support platform approach offered in the UNDP current strategic plan. It is also worth mentioning that Armenia will be hosting the World Congress on Information Technologies later in October this year. The leading technology thinkers and innovators will gather to advance the conversation of the key issues facing the industry in the world, such as issues related to artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, impact of ICT in education, women in technology, and many others. Seizing this opportunity, I would like to invite all relevant stakeholders to participate in this remarkable event. Ladies and gentlemen, as a strong advocate for multilateralism and partnership, Armenia appreciates the inclusive, participatory, demand-driven nature of the South-South cooperation that has a particular significance for the sensitive regions with complicated platforms and conflicts. We believe that regional cross-border cooperation plays an indispensable role in building trust and creating an environment conducive to lasting peace, development, and security and prosperity. As a landlocked developing country that faces transport and economic blockades from neighboring Turkey and Azerbaijan, we are firm in our belief that coercive unilateral measures and lack of cooperative atmosphere impede the prospects for the establishment of good neighborly relations, contradict to the letter and spirit of 2030 Agenda, and negatively affect the implementation of SDGs that, among other things, also require regional cooperation. unwillingness to seek compromise-based solutions, the rejection of the basic principles of international law, such as self-determination of nations, or the continuation of the policy of the use of force and the threat of force which pose existential threat to the security and the lives of the people of Nagorno-Karabakh from the side of Azerbaijan remain serious obstacles for the peaceful resolution of Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, as well as for the harmonious development of our region. Despite these complications, Armenia is firm in its path towards ensuring the democratic progress of the country based on the strong protection of human rights and the rule of law, as well as the economic development of the nation based on the competitiveness and free from corruptive patterns. The recent political transformations are the best evidence to that. In conclusion, Mr. Chairman, I would like to reaffirm Armenia's full support to a continued dialogue on the South-South cooperation, with a special focus on the means of unlocking the enormous potential of knowledge, technology, and innovation. And we are keen to encourage further discussions on partnerships in support of socially and environmentally impactful projects and the sustainable development goals. Thank you for your attention.
I thank His Excellency Artak Aptonian, Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs of Armenia, and I now give the floor to Mr. Son Tan Bui, Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs of Vietnam.
Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is my great honor to speak at the second high-level United Nations Conference on South-South Cooperation, marking the 40th anniversary of the adoption of the Buenos Aires Plan of Action for promoting and implementing technical cooperation among developing countries. Allow me also echo the remarks made by previous speaker regarding Argentina's warm hospitality and excellent arrangements for this important conference. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, over the past 4 decades, South-South cooperation has recorded significant achievements. Southern countries has served as a major engine of global economic growth. Their cooperation has broadened and deepened for more sustainable and inclusive development and fairer international relations. With proactive international integration over the past more than 30 years of innovation, Vietnam's cooperation with developing countries has grown in different forms and fields. Besides bilateral cooperation, Vietnam has implemented roughly 100 projects in the Mekong sub-region cooperation and around 60 projects in the Initiative for ASEAN Integration. We have actively supported Laos PDR, our landlocked neighboring country, to access the sea via our seaports and strengthened development cooperation with Laos, Cambodia, Myanmar at sub-regional and regional levels. Vietnam has close cooperation with many African countries in food security, agriculture, education, healthcare, poverty reduction, and environment. Since 1996, 10 triangular cooperations projects have been implemented, and more than 300 Vietnamese agricultural experts have been sent to Senegal, Congo, Benin, and Mozambique, where they transfer know-how and provide training for thousands of African farmers to contribute to their hunger elimination and food security efforts. Ladies and gentlemen, fast and profound changes in the world are affecting development of southern countries, calling for greater efforts to revitalize South-South and triangular cooperation for more sustainable and inclusive development. From the lessons during the development and integration of Vietnam, we would like to share the following. First, economic reform and active international integration are key to Vietnam's significant development progress in the past 30 years. Today, with 16 free trade arrangements, including the new generation FTAs such as CPTPP, have accelerated our comprehensive innovation towards more sustainable development. Second, putting people at the heart of development is a fundamental principle with sustainable and inclusive development, where economic goes closely in hand with cultural development, social progress, and equality. In Vietnam, the government has implemented different policies to ensure all people can participate and enjoy the fruits of economic development. We continue to share with the southern countries our experiences in poverty reduction, sustainable agriculture, education, healthcare, and social security. Third, South-South triangular cooperation should be expanded and enriched in diverse forms and modality. Three good lessons in South-South cooperation we have learned are good matching between the needs of developing countries and the capacity of Vietnam, ensuring projects' tangible impacts on locals' well-being, and effectively combining financial resources of the donors with experiences and expertise of Vietnam to support developing countries. South-South cooperation could extend beyond traditional areas to include other potential areas such as infrastructure, ICT, telecommunication. Viettel Group of Vietnam is an example. Viettel's investment in telecommunication in 10 countries in Asia, Africa, Latin America has so far provided coverage for 47 million local subscribers and helped them access to knowledge and connect with the world through 4G networks, building upon the experiences from Viettel's groups of investment in developing countries. We propose the extensive application of public-private partnership in South-South cooperation projects, particularly in promoting trade, investment, infrastructure, development, and agriculture. Last but not least is a reliable and responsible partner. Vietnam continues to contribute to upholding and consolidating the values of South-South cooperation as an indispensable framework for solidarity and collective actions. With effective South-South cooperation, we can together strengthen our common voices and shared interest on global issues, particularly on promotion of multilateralism and global partnership for realization of the Sdgs. Multilateral organizations, particularly UN system and development institutions, should maintain their strong support for South-South cooperation and enhance the role as important bridges between southern and northern countries for a world of lasting peace and shared prosperity. Thank you for your attention.
I thank Mr. Son Tan Bui, Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs of Vietnam. And now I give the floor to Mr. Sam Tam Shin Seong, Minister of State, Minister of Foreign Affairs, and Minister of Social and Family Development of Singapore.
Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, a very good evening to all of you. I would like to start by thanking the government of the Argentine Republic for hosting this milestone conference and also for giving us this opportunity to share Singapore's perspective on the South-South cooperation and also its potential for the future. Ladies and gentlemen, Singapore benefited firsthand from South-South and triangular cooperation as a young and developing nation in 1965. Then we received technical assistance from all stakeholders, including developed countries, fellow developing countries, and international organizations. This diversity of development cooperation helped us get into our acts quickly. So having benefited from South-South cooperation, Singapore is therefore committed to paying it forward. And established in 1992, the Singapore Cooperation Program is Singapore's contributions to South-South and triangular cooperation. More than 125,000 officials from around 170 countries have attended training under the Singapore Cooperation Program in areas such as urban planning, public service, and water management. But our journey doesn't stop here. When we live in an age of great uncertainty, the world is actually becoming more risky, in a sense. So studies have shown that geopolitical and security threats have increased over the past 4 years, while risks from economic shocks, climate change, and pandemics continue to cast a long shadow over the global community. It is therefore timely that the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development was adopted in 2015 to set out a development roadmap for the future for many countries. And this requires resources on a massive scale. The UN estimates that between 5 and 7 trillion US dollars are needed each year to help us achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. The challenge is therefore enormous, but not impossible. To streamline our efforts and resources, there's a need to take stock and update our programs to meet developing countries' evolving needs. With this purpose in mind, Singapore has realigned the Singapore Cooperation Programme's objective to better support the successful implementations of the 2030 Agenda. For example, we have developed training programs that draw on Singapore's experience in water and sanitation, sustainable urbanization, and public institutions to support progress on Sustainable Development Goals number 6, number 11, and 16. We have also put together a special climate action plan package to help developing countries mitigate and adapt to climate change. This is really a serious threat which small island developing countries are currently facing. Where we do not have enough resources or expertise, we have collaborated with others to curate programs that better meet the needs of developing countries. Notably, Singapore has started new joint training programs with Argentina and Chile to support Southeast Asian, Caribbean, and Latin American countries' sustainable development efforts. We have also cooperated with the UN agencies to deliver courses and conferences such as the Singapore UN Habitat Sustainable Urbanization Programs for African City Leaders. Moving forward, there's a greater need for countries to build inclusive and collaborative networks across sectors and effectively mobilize resources. And in this vein, Singapore established the ASEAN Smart City Networks last year. Building these networks have helped to catalyze mutually beneficial partnerships between member countries and cities, as well as external partners to drive smart cities development. We intend to build on this momentum and continue contributing meaningfully to South-South and triangular cooperation. To conclude, Mr. Chairman, Singapore hopes to make a modest contribution to help create the necessary conditions for sustainable development in our fellow developing countries. Our experience may not always be directly applicable to other countries, but we hope interested countries can adapt what they find useful in the best practices and lessons that we share to suit their own local contexts. With strong commitment and resolve, I'm confident that the South-South and triangular cooperation will remain relevant for the next 40 years. Thank you.
I thank Mr. Tam Ching Seong, Minister of State, Minister of Foreign Affairs, and Minister of Social and Family Development of Singapore. And I now give the floor to Mr. Tong Phan Savamfet, I hope I'm right, Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Lao People's Democratic Republic.
Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, at the outset, on behalf of the delegation of the Lao People's Democratic Republic, I would like to express our sincere congratulations and appreciation to the government and people of Argentina for hosting this important conference in this beautiful city of Buenos Aires. My delegation aligns itself with the statement delivered by His Excellency the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the State of Palestine on behalf of the Group of 77 and China, as well as the statement to be delivered by Thailand on behalf of ASEAN. Mr. President, this conference on South-South cooperation is of great importance, marking the 40th anniversary of the adoption of the Buenos Aires Plan of Action for promoting and implementing technical cooperation among developing countries, demonstrating a long history of fruitful and friendly cooperation framework. South-South cooperation has played a vital role in strengthening international development cooperation to support developing countries under the framework of global partnership, with particular attention given to eradicating poverty and promoting sustainable development through realizing the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. In this regard, my delegation wishes to reiterate the South-South cooperation should be guided by the spirit of solidarity among peoples and countries of the South, as well as the principles of respect for national sovereignty, non-interference, national development strategies and priorities, and mutual benefits, among others. Also, South-South cooperation is a complement to and not a substitute for North-South cooperation. Mr. President, as a least developed and landlocked country sharing borders with 5 southern partners, the Lao PDR has attached great importance to enhancing partnerships at all levels to support our cause of graduating from the least developed country status and transforming from a landlocked country into a land-linked one. In this connection, the Lao government has recognized the important contribution of South-South and triangular cooperation to the achievement of our socio-economic development, including through taking advantages of the similarities, relevant know-how, and proven development expertise among developing countries. Therefore, the government has included the South-South Cooperation Strategy Framework into its current National Socio-Economic Development Plan and the Vientiane Declaration on Partnership for Effective Development Cooperation. To this end, the government, together with development partners and other stakeholders, have identified a number of actions for further enhancing South-South and triangular cooperation in the implementation of SDGs during the last roundtable meeting, which is the National Aid Coordination and Development Cooperation Forum at the country level. In this connection, the Lao government recognizes the central role of the United Nations in coordinating and facilitating South-South and triangular cooperation in a wide range of areas. Thus, we strongly support actions and initiatives to strengthen the UN country team on the ground in order to ensure coherence of the mandates given to these agencies and South-South and triangular cooperation. On this note, it is important to highlight a few key areas that require special attention as follows: to deepen understanding of the nature and modalities of South-South cooperation that are guided by the principles of South-South cooperation and the ways and means to enhance and accelerate its development impact, to encourage the development of networks for exchange of knowledge and best practices, peer learning and coordination among South-South cooperation actors as means of facilitating access to important knowledge pools, and to develop and scale up of South-South and triangular cooperation initiatives at strategic, policy and project levels. Mr. President, in closing, the Lao PDR reiterates its determination to work closely with international community, development partners, UN system, and other stakeholders in supporting and facilitating the development cooperation in the framework of South-South cooperation and triangular cooperation, so as to fully leverage and unlock the potential of the comparative advantage aimed at enhancing and identifying the proper ways and means to eradicate poverty in all its forms and achieve the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development to ensure that no one is left behind. Thank you.
I thank Mr. Tong Phan Savonphet, Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Lao People's Democratic Republic. And now I give the floor to Mr. Juan Pablo de la Iglesia y González de Peredo, Secretary of State for International Cooperation and for Ibero-America and the Caribbean of Spain.
Señor Presidente,
Mr. President, distinguished delegates, I wish to begin by adding my congratulations for the 40th anniversary of the adoption of the Buenos Aires Plan of Action. For Spain, it is particularly noteworthy that the anniversary of BAPA coincides with the 30th anniversary of the Spanish Agency for International Cooperation for Development. Spain has a long history of support for South-South cooperation, especially in Ibero-America. Ibero-American countries share objectives and values, and we have been working on creating horizontal spaces for cooperation that bring us closer to those objectives. These characteristics and affinities make the Ibero-American space a particularly good one for South-South and triangular cooperation. In 2007, we created the Ibero-American Program to strengthen South-South cooperation, a commitment to development, which made it possible to make major progress, so much so that today we can say that Ibero-America is an example for South-South and triangular cooperation. A good result of this are the reports of Spanish cooperation, especially the report on South-South cooperation, which publishes the data for the region, which is a very valuable document and which serves as a reference for other regions. Based on that fruitful, intense activity, Spanish cooperation since 2005 has been conducting a triangular cooperation program along two lines of intervention. On the one hand, support for the creation and strengthening of institutions managing cooperation in Latin America and the Caribbean, and on the other, triangular cooperation that has bolstered the dual nature of countries in the region. In this area, Spain generally plays the role of facilitator between two other countries. I also should mention the Interconecta program, which plans international activity for our training centers in Latin America and which has undertaken activities of knowledge exchange between countries in the region following the lines which the countries themselves have identified as priorities. As I've said, we have focused on a geographic area, Latin America and the Caribbean, which has given us an experience we now want to convey to other areas where we have a long-standing tradition of cooperation, such as the Sahel or North Africa. Mr. President, the adoption of the 2030 Agenda opens a new stage where we are to overcome the North-South traditional framework for a sustainable development model to which we all should contribute. And since we are to work in alliances following SDG 17, we have a signpost on the path. I should say that Spanish cooperation is a precursor of SDG 17, since from the very beginning it has associated various stakeholders in countries with different levels of development who make contributions and conduct actions in diverse sectors as well. Today, we are promoting more flexible triangular cooperation, where the number and kind of stakeholders as well as their degree of involvement is not predefined, but rather is defined in the most effective fashion for each action. We believe that in triangular cooperation, the process is as important as the result itself. This 40th anniversary of BAPA is also the opportunity to identify future challenges. There are many that remain before us. For example, the need to focus more on indigenous communities, the Afro-descendant population, or the culture development nexus. More work to be done is the full application of the principle of effective assistance when we use these modalities. Cooperation is an act of collective responsibility, but also global solidarity, to which the 2030 Agenda calls us. We are certain that this conference will contribute to heightening the role of South-South cooperation and triangular cooperation as instruments making it possible for us to work in alliances for a sustainable development that will leave no one behind. In this endeavor, you will always be able to count on Spain. Thank you very much.
I thank Mr. Juan Pablo de la Iglesia y González de Peredo, Secretary of State for International Cooperation and for Ibero-American and the Caribbean of Spain. And now I give the floor to Mrs. to Mr. Elias Shoniin, Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs of Liberia. Okay, thank you. Hi, how are you? Fine, me too. Liberia, then Chile. Oops.
Mr. President, Excellencies, we've gathered here today to take stock of the gains and challenges of exerting South-South and triangular cooperation as a viable tool for implementing the Sustainable Development Goals 40 years after the historic adoption of the Buenos Aires Plans of Action. I bring you greetings from His Excellency Dr. George Manuia, President of the Republic of Liberia, who has expressed his regrets for his inability to participate in this very important discourse. Since the adoption of the Buenos Aires Plans of Action in 1978, which underpins the evolution of technical cooperation among developing countries, international cooperation is today witnessing a new trend in international development from dominant North-South cooperation to increasingly South-South cooperation. This effort was reinforced by the Accra Agenda for Action, preceded by Paris Declaration on Aid Effectiveness, further asserting critical relevance of the mode of cooperation. These frameworks have at their core ownership and have invariably laid the foundation for enhanced cooperation between countries which are inextricably linked to promote sustainable and inclusive growth. South-South cooperation presents the platform for the sharing of experiences and often complements traditional development partners. Today, the world bears witness to heightening cooperation among countries that share similar characteristics. The dynamism of emerging donors, which include a wide range of countries, have quadrupled and contribution of emerging donors to the development aid envelope in the last 10 years. Overall, they account for an estimated 11 to 15% of global aid flows from donor countries and are expected to contribute about 20% of total donor funding globally by 2020. Beyond development assistance, South-South cooperation today has hugely affected the private sector through instruments such as investment flows, trade, technological transfers, knowledge exchange, as well as concessional loans, vital for ensuring sustainable development. From a regional perspective, South-South cooperation can be a major tool for political consolidation, peace and security, and socio-economic development, including cross-border investment and trade. South-South cooperation mechanisms have been utilized to boost trade among African countries with the goal of reducing transaction costs, eliminate trade barriers, and deepen integration through the African Continental Free Trade Area. This mode of cooperation within a South-South context presents enormous opportunity in solving problems that African states on their own have not been able to resolve. For example, joint border patrol and exchange of surveillance, peacekeeping operations, security cooperation, forest management, etc., and etc. Practical exploration of potential opportunities should be enhanced within the South-South context, such as the establishment of a reliable air travel link between Latin America and West Africa, linking a closer geographical proximity between the two continents will deepen economic and social cooperation within the South-South context. Coming from a country that has experienced a protracted civil conflict, which ended 16 years ago, the successful utilization of South-South mechanisms projects the important contribution of West African and regional governments, which has now established a stable and secure future for Liberia and the West African sub-region as a whole. Countries in the regions did not only support the United Nations system in triangular cooperation to ensure the cessation of violence in Liberia, but they also played active role in the reconstruction and development of post-conflict Liberia, sharing synergies and providing technical assistance in many areas. Excellencies, while stressing the imposing potential of the SDGs in conveying meanings of great promise and hope for human betterment, limitation of fully leveraging the opportunities of South-South cooperation could be an unforgivable failings of our time. Targets in the SDGs framework can never be achieved in the absence of clear and implementable modalities that promote enhanced cooperation among developing countries through South-South mechanisms. Excellencies, in a hybrid alignment with South-South and North-South cooperation, the government of Liberia in last October launched its first 5-year development plan, the Pro-Po Agenda for Prosperity and Development, which highlights urgent and international and intentional interventions to be taken by relevant stakeholders to addressing poverty and inspiring national transformation and hope. Within the South-South context, developing countries are encouraged to take bold steps that include reorganizing the increasing role emerging and non-traditional donors can play in development cooperation. I therefore encourage global partners in development and member states to boldly seize new opportunities and to commit to a new global partnership that promotes economic and social transformations that accelerate inclusive and shared prosperity. In conclusion, let me extend profound appreciation to the organizers of this conference for this ingenious initiative that brings together leaders in South-South and triangular cooperation and have mobilized the international community around this noble objective. Celebrating 40 years of cooperation around this theme has engendered hope across the developing world, especially the poor and marginalized. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Elias Shonin, Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs of Liberia. Before proceeding to the next speaker, I would like to remind delegations of the agreed time of 5 minutes. Speakers with longer statements are encouraged to read a shorter version of their text and submit the full length of their statement to the Secretariat for posting on the conference website. Otherwise, we're going to spend Saturday and Sunday in Buenos Aires. Thank you. Now, I give the floor to the next speaker, Mr. Lovelin Landers, Vice Minister for International Relations and Cooperation of South Africa.
Mr. President, Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, It is an honor and a privilege for me to attend and participate in the deliberations of this conference. Allow me to thank the government of Argentina for their generosity and their efforts. Mr. President, South Africa aligns itself with the statement that was delivered by the State of Palestine on behalf of the Group of 77 plus China. Growing inequality within and among states threatens the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals, which are essential for the creation of a more inclusive world where no one is left behind. Despite the 2015 commitment by our leaders on the means of implementation, the sad reality is that there remains serious funding gaps for the implementation of this agenda. This conference, therefore, presents a unique opportunity to review lessons learned from the past 4 decades and to contemplate the contribution of South-South cooperation for the effective implementation of the 2030 Agenda. Ladies and gentlemen, South-South cooperation is one of the foundational pillars of South Africa's foreign policy. The Southern African Development Community, the African continent, and the Global South, therefore, continue to occupy a central priority in our foreign policy. On the role of South-South cooperation in the implementation of the 2030 Agenda, we reiterate the importance and relevance of the Nairobi Outcomes document, which asserts that South-South cooperation and its agenda must be set by countries of the South. We will continue to resist any attempt to redefine the role, scope, and principles of South-South cooperation. Hence, our reiteration that North-South cooperation is still the core for development cooperation. South-South cooperation and triangular cooperation are therefore complementary to North-South cooperation and not a substitute thereof. Mr. President, the role of multilateral trade in growth and economic development of countries, particularly developing countries, cannot be overemphasized. We recognize the significant contribution of regional trade and its ability to promote sustainable development. In this regard, African leaders have agreed to the establishment of the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, which would be one of the largest regional free trade areas in the world. The private sector continues to provide an enabling environment for job creation and economic development. Investment by South African private companies and state-owned entities into Africa continues to grow. South Africa is ranked as one of the largest sources of foreign direct investment into the African continent. Furthermore, in the context of the IPSA Fund, South Africa contributes meaningfully in supporting international efforts to eradicate poverty and end hunger in developing countries and in the Global South. In this connection, the IPSA Fund received global recognition through the United Nations South-South Partnership Award, the UN MDG Award, and the South-South and Triangular Cooperation Champions Award. Other initiatives include our cooperation within BRICS and the creation of the New Development Bank. This bank provides financing for 30 infrastructure and sustainable development projects. By the end of 2018, the bank's total lending volume stood at approximately $8 billion. Additionally, our African Renaissance Fund remains an important vehicle for providing support to the continent in peace building, conservation of cultural heritage, agriculture and food security, capacity building, and other forms of technical cooperation, as well as humanitarian aid. And at this point, I want to point out that we are at the forefront of assisting in the cyclone-hit countries of Mozambique, Malawi, and Zimbabwe. And we want to take this opportunity to invite member states present here today to join us in these efforts. Mr. President, to unlock the potential of developing countries, a robust global partnership with developed countries remains key. In recognizing the different levels of development, official development assistance remains vital for developing countries, especially in Africa and in the least developed countries. As we improve the industrial capacity and diversity of developing countries, the role of the private sector should therefore complement and not replace ODA as developing countries transition and expand their industrial base and transition from aid to trade. This necessitates a commitment to promote a universal, transparent, rules-based, open, non-discriminatory, inclusive, and equitable multilateral trading system with the World Trade Organization as its anchor and the conclusion of the Doha Development Round. Further, Mr. President, as one of the means of implementation, cooperation in science, technology, and innovation requires comprehensive approaches that incorporate capacity building, access to knowledge, and financial resources. Such cooperation could acknowledge local absorptive capacity and must be executed in a manner that does not replace nor undermine efforts to strengthen endogenous technological and innovation potential. Ladies and gentlemen, illicit financial outflows are a major challenge to development, especially in Africa. There is thus a need for the United Nations to establish at its headquarters in New York City a dedicated universal body to deal with the scourge of illicit financial outflows. In conclusion, we want to thank the UN system for its efforts to enhance the role and impact of the United Nations Office for South-South Cooperation. We believe, however, that more can be done by strengthening the office with financial, human, and budgetary resources. As we gather here, 40 years since the historic meeting on South-South cooperation, and as we embark on another 40-year journey, we can rightfully be proud of our collective achievement. However, we dare not become complacent. The challenges ahead and the task confronting all of us are huge. As we collectively reflect on this important task ahead, I am reminded of the words of our former president, Thabo Mbeki, when he said, and I quote, "Whether, as a collective, our efforts are sufficient to accelerate the outcomes of major UN conferences and summits, outcomes that are critical to the development of the lives of billions of people we represent." As we reflect on this question, we must agree that more can and should be done in the interests of our people and our collective humanity. Thank you for listening to me.
I thank Mr. Llewellyn Landers, Vice Minister for International Relations and Cooperation of South Africa. Now, I give the floor to His Excellency Ambassador Norberto Moretti, Vice Minister for Commercial and Economic Foreign Policy of Brazil.
Signor Presidente,
Mr. President, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to congratulate the government of Argentina for having hosted this very important conference of the United Nations. I'd like to congratulate our Argentinian friends for the initiative of organizing this conference, which I consider a great success. It couldn't have come at a better time. 40 years have passed since the approval of the Buenos Aires Action Plan, and during these 2 years we have witnessed an impressive development in the relations among developing countries. We need to evaluate what has been achieved over the past few decades and to define, on the basis of consensus, the main orientations for the next few years. Today, we can clearly see the success of the decisions that were collectively taken 40 years ago. We see that cooperation among developing countries has taken on an unprecedented momentum in all its various dimensions in terms of scale, substance, volume, complexity, and also the concrete results achieved. Today, we are aware of the importance of the coherent set of principles that were adopted here in Buenos Aires 40 years ago to ensure the promotion of South-South cooperation. Principles such as the respect for sovereignty, the non-interference in the internal affairs of states, and the non-imposition of conditionality. These principles continue to be valid and robust 4 decades later. The BAPA+40 conference, I think, forces us to tackle the challenge of moving forward and thus identify and put in practice the means that are necessary to ensure the sustainable continuation of both quantitative and qualitative growth of South-South cooperation. That is our contribution to the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development under the motto of leaving no one behind. This is precisely what we want to do with the same source of inspiration, with the same original spirit that inspired the original conference 4 decades ago. One of the most important challenges that we have to confront is the fact that official development assistance has stagnated and sometimes been reduced. In addition to that, there is a problem with measuring the level of development of nations. As you know, economic and social inequalities have various structural causes. Therefore, the measurement of the level of development of a country must be multidimensional. Consequently, the mechanisms of support to international cooperation must be flexible and should be adapted to the specificities of each country. This is demonstrated by the experience of Brazil, one of the main partners of cooperation with other developing countries in different formats. Over 100 Brazilian institutions from the public and private sector and from civil society organizations actively participate in initiatives of technical cooperation and training human resources, in conducting joint research in science and technology, both innovating and raising resources to support development. We have a heritage of we've been involved in some 7,000 projects that have been implemented in the over 30 years of the existence of Brazilian Agency of Cooperation. We operate in over 100 developing countries with joint initiatives implemented with some 45 international organizations in over 10 developed countries. Also, we are very satisfied with the results obtained through the humanitarian cooperation in Brazil. The government of Brazil greatly values the humanitarian dimension of South-South cooperation because we believe that prevention and building of the capacity of resilience in the face of disasters and calamities could play a key role in ensuring the progress of nations and peoples, in particular those that are the most vulnerable. In other words, we are seeking to link the immediate response to emergencies to long-term solutions based on structural initiatives aimed at strengthening resilience to disasters and stimulating the socioeconomic recovery of countries, and especially of the populations that are affected. Currently, we are preparing to cooperate on a large scale with the governments and peoples of Mozambique, Malawi, and Zimbabwe to overcome the devastating effects of the tropical cyclone Idal. Furthermore, Brazil is aware of the sensitivity raised by the measurement and assessment of South-South cooperation. Developing countries have the prerogative of designing and evaluating on a voluntary and validating on a voluntary basis harmonized methodologies in order to quantify and evaluate South-South cooperation. We also note with great satisfaction the stress put by this conference on triangular cooperation. We have been and will continue to be favorable to maintaining the conceptual and flexible conceptual and operative structures for this type of cooperation. The huge potential of this cooperation hasn't been fully explored. We want to further improve the huge comparative advantages of each one of our partners. Therefore, we need to avoid adopting conceptual and management frameworks that are too rigid as they apply to trilateral cooperation. Mr. President, updating South-South cooperation involves, of course, discussing partnerships with actors that are not part of the public sector. We've begun assessing possible arrangements that, if they are designed properly, could meet the principles and goals of the foreign policy for international cooperation of my country and the needs of our partners. Of course, we can see that success in this task is fundamentally linked to defining appropriate criteria to guide the partnerships with the new actors of the private sector, of civil society, academia, and others. In the case of the private sector, for example, we believe that it is necessary to define clear and verifiable criteria to ensure the effective and positive contribution of cooperation to benefit the development of the beneficiary country. Furthermore, we rely on decentralized cooperation, which often plays a secondary role in the policies of and actions of member states. It is clear that the potential of our subnational entities, given their huge dynamic potential, has not been fully mobilized. Therefore, we have to acknowledge and strengthen the means to promote exchange of experiences and innovative partnerships among local governments. These, Mr. President, are the key messages that Brazil would like to convey to the participants of this conference. We hope that the international community, in its commitment to South-South and trilateral cooperation, is inspired by the effort to update the main principles that guide us. We hope ultimately that the system that we built in Buenos Aires 40 years ago continues to develop, becomes stronger and more coherent, and will continue guiding us in meeting the challenges of the upcoming decades. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency Ambassador Norberto Moretti, Vice Minister for Commercial and Economic Foreign Policy of Brazil. Now, I give the floor to Mr. Sedat Onal, Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs of Turkey.
Mr. Chair, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I am going to shorten my speech because of time constraints. I would first like to thank the Argentinian authorities for their hospitality and the excellent organization. As part of its strong commitment to the South-South and triangular cooperation, Turkey hosted the Global South-South Development Expo in Antalya in 2017. The Antalya Expo provided a platform for all development actors and stakeholders to showcase Southern development solutions, explore new avenues for collaboration, and initiate new partnerships. Official development assistance has a critical role in achieving SDGs, especially in least developed countries. In 2018, Turkey's official development assistance has increased to $8.6 billion US dollars, and its ratio to its gross national income has exceeded 1%. Currently, Turkey hosts 4 million displaced people, including 3.6 million Syrian refugees. Mr. Chair, engaging the private sector in partnerships for development is essential. We firmly believe that implementation of public-private partnership models is instrumental not only for sustainable development, but for eradicating poverty as well. Leveraging frontier technologies as an agent of sustainable development is an emerging field of cooperation. On her part, Turkey actively supports strengthening science, technology, and innovation capacity of the least developed countries to facilitate their technological leapfrogging. In this context, LDC Technology Bank, which was set in Turkey, is an excellent example of South-South cooperation. It has become operational last June. We call on all countries of the North and South to support and actively engage with the bank. Mr. Chair, in our efforts to implement the 2030 Agenda through South and triangular cooperation, particular attention must be devoted to Africa and LDCs. Turkey's development cooperation with Africa gives priority to technical and vocational capacity building. Our total development and humanitarian aid to Africa in the last decade reached $3 billion US dollars. Turkish Cooperation and Coordination Agency has implemented over 400 projects in Africa. Another region, Turkey has intensified its cooperation with over the last decade is Latin America and the Caribbean. Since 2012, TICA realized over 130 projects in this region. In closing, I would like to reaffirm Turkey's commitment to actively engage in South-South and triangular cooperation in order to support the SDG implementation across the world. Thank you for your attention.
I thank the Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs of Turkey for his statement. I now give the floor to Mr. Julius Muya, Principal Secretary of the State Department for Planning and National Treasury of Kenya.
On behalf of the government of Kenya, I wish to thank the government of Argentina for welcoming us to this beautiful city and for the hospitality that has been extended to us. I also thank the President of the UN General Assembly for organizing this important meeting, coming 40 years after the first meeting of the South-South Cooperation was held in this city. Many thanks for all that has been done. We also recognize that many things have changed. Progress has been made, but we still have a lot more work to do. I congratulate His Excellency, Mr. Mauricio Macri, on this election as the president of this conference, and assure you of my delegation's full support. Excellencies, coming in early stages of implementation of 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, this conference offers a unique opportunity for developing countries to re-examine and recalibrate our approach to leveraging on evidence-informed partnership frameworks to accelerate equitable, inclusive, and sustainable development. The forum also provides an opportunity for us to relook at the connection between poverty, equity, and environmental sustainability. And so, as we all know, a healthy environment supplies the necessities of life, like water, food, and clean air. It also provides resources for economic growth and the means to fight natural hazards while strengthening resilience. Indeed, the well-being of developing countries is often linked to the state of the natural environment and the opportunities it offers. And it's for this reason that Kenya has integrated the Sustainable Development Goals into our development planning, that is our medium-term Plan 3 process that is also informed by Kenya's Agenda 2063 and our development blueprint, our Vision 2030. We all appreciate that all living things, and this includes the world community, depend heavily on the natural environment for their health and livelihoods, and this is especially so among developing countries where a majority of the population is rural-based and derive their livelihoods from agriculture, which is intricately interconnected with the environment. And so as we explore new economic opportunities which are related to green growth and technology, it is important also for us as developing countries to appreciate the strong nexus between sustainably managing natural environment and our pursuit for economic growth. Currently, Kenya has one of the highest concentrations of green energy sources in Africa. We have also banned the manufacture and the use of plastic bags. In addition, the government has put in place measures to increase the tree and forest cover to reach at least 10% by 2030, and this is among other initiatives of environmental management that we have to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. Excellencies, the blue economy offers a new frontier to explore the missing opportunities for the global sustainable development. So in realization of this critical fact, Kenya hosted the first ever Sustainable Blue Economy Conference in Nairobi in November 2018, which was a big success. As we reflect in our past, we are able to identify with improvements in neighborhoods and generation of shared solution as one of the significant benefits of South-South cooperation. Kenya has been the forefront to support regional integration and mutually beneficial continental initiatives. For instance, the government has provided leadership and direction in strengthening and rejuvenating the African peer review mechanism, which provides a South-South voluntary learning opportunity for good governance. So in 2017, Kenya was subjected to the second APRM review and has interpreted the expert suggestions in the 2018-2022 medium-term plan. We've also been the first country to sign the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement. We are also benefiting from collaboration in sharing knowledge on good practices using that framework. And so the developing nations should be supported to adopt and strengthen national policies to enhance South-South and triangular cooperation and enhance the capacity of national and subnational coordination mechanism. Excellencies, finally, the continental digital divide continues to widen, and we encourage all of us to adopt and fast-track the use of science so that we can achieve equitable and inclusive global development. Thank you very much.
I thank the Principal Secretary of the State Department for Planning, National Treasury of Kenya, for his statement. I now give the floor to Mr. Damas Daniel Mbaro, Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs and East African Cooperation of the United Republic of Tanzania.
Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. President, at the outset, allow me to convey to you our fraternity greetings from His Excellency, the President John Joseph Magufuli, and the people of the United Republic of Tanzania, who wish a very successful deliberation and a fruitful outcome of this meeting. Before I proceed with my statement, allow me to express our heartfelt condolences to the government and people of republics of Mozambique, Zimbabwe, and Malawi on the loss of lives and enormous devastation caused by Cyclone Idai. At this time of grief, the government and people of the United Republic of Tanzania reiterate their solidarity, support, and call upon the international community to dispense humanitarian assistance to our brothers and sisters at these critical times. Mr. President, Tanzania attaches utmost importance to the values and objectives of the South-South cooperation, which seeks to promote the welfare of its citizenry. Mr. President, it is indeed a privilege and a pleasure for me to be part of this important conference as we people of the South seek to advance our cooperation and collaboration in a bid to stimulate economic growth and sustainable development. 40 years of Buenos Aires Plan of Action for promoting and implementing technical cooperation among developing countries have shown encouraging development. Mr. President, we need to underscore that there are profound systematic changes taking place in international political and economic relationships which have fundamentally challenged policymaking globally. Those dynamics in the international scene have compelled a shift in relationship from traditional aid programs to investment and trade partnership, which then affects needs, distribution of resources, and the interest of the nations. With that understanding, let the South-South cooperation and the triangular cooperation invigorate effective partnership to promote intra-regional trade and investment as catalyst to growth. We urge countries of the South to commit extending their assistances to fellow developing countries to reinforce the existing solidarity and cooperation. As it was reaffirmed by the previous South-South summits, member countries should assist each other through sharing their resources in the spirit of South-South solidarity and deliver their development assistances through two common channels. First, the government-to-government channel, and second, the governmental institution to government institution and the private sector partnership. In terms of cooperation, countries and institutions of the South need to strengthen their legitimate place in a global drive for development effective and contribute to partnership such as Global Partnership for Effective Development Cooperation and the Agenda 2030 Partnership Goal. They must consolidate their cooperation mechanism with their partner countries. They also need to share visions, coordinate programs, and generally build synergies with fellow players of South-South and triangular cooperation. Mr. President, all the countries of the South face similar challenges such as combating poverty, creating employment opportunities, especially for youth, which is the largest part of the growing population. the South-South and triangular cooperation needs in the modern era to be built and cemented on the basis of respect of sovereignty, equality, and fair and equitable trade. Mr. President, I wish to end my remarks by noting that the growing trade partnership with the South in the past decade is encouraging. South-South investment, too, has shown unprecedented dynamism. Investors from the South often have important regional knowledge and are increasingly willing to take business risk. This trend is set to defy trade dependence from elsewhere and make some advanced countries of South become an additional source of official development assistance. Thank you.
Doy las gracias al viceministro.
I thank the Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs and East African Cooperation of the United Republic of Tanzania for his statement. I now give the floor to Mr. Charles Owiredu, Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs and Regional Integration of Ghana.
Mr. Chairman, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the government of Ghana. My delegation joins previous speakers in thanking His Excellency President Mauricio Macri and the government of Argentina for hosting this conference and for the excellent facilities placed at our disposal. Ghana aligns herself with a statement delivered by the State of Palestine on behalf of the Group of 77 and China. 40 years ago, on the basis of ideas and principles of South-South cooperation, we began to chart a path towards a more democratic, fair, and equitable economic system, and to address the gaping economic disparities between North and South through collective self-reliance and the promotion of technical cooperation among developing countries. Ghana is pleased to note that considerable progress has been made since the landmark conference. Over the years, countries of the South have significantly increased their weight in the world economy and today account for more than 59% of global GDP. South-South trade as a share of world merchandise has risen appreciably since the 80s and now represents 26% of global trade, while a third of FDI outflows can be attributed to countries of the South. This signals great potential for advancing the development aspirations of our respective nations and regions. Ghana believes that in the same spirit of mutual assistance and solidarity that inspired us in 1978, we can make greater strides in South-South cooperation and triangular cooperation in the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. The steady expansion of South-South cooperation in terms of its volume, country participation, and diversification present us with significant opportunities to be tapped. We therefore welcome the convening of this conference as an auspicious moment and an opportunity to reinvigorate South-South cooperation and harness its potential for accelerated implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Mr. Chairman, South-South cooperation is not meant to replace North-South cooperation and must not undermine the commitments that were made by the developed North within the context of the Addis Ababa Action Agenda on Financing for Development and the SDGs. We are cognizant of the fact that while overseas development assistance remains a dominant pillar of development finance, the financial resources needed for the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals cannot be met by the ODA alone. For this reason, Ghana calls upon the international community to explore means of leveraging new and innovative funding mechanisms under the framework of South-South cooperation to complement ODA inflows. We must forge effective partnerships among governments, public and private sector actors, academia, and non-governmental organizations, particularly philanthropy in these efforts. The expansion of South-led multilateral development banks in recent years also presents us with an opportunity to explore additional financing mechanisms for the SDG implementation, particularly infrastructure development and climate financing. Interregional collaborative initiatives, such as the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, FOCAC, the Indian-Africa Forum Summit, and the Turkey-Africa Economic and Business Forum, should be further utilized to enhance the implementation of the SDGs, particularly in those areas, goals, and targets that could benefit from such collaboration. The expansion of South-led multilateral development banks also presents an opportunity to explore financing mechanisms for the sustainable development projects in developing countries. One of the major successes of South-South cooperation has been in the area of capacity building, knowledge sharing, and technology transfer. We wish to urge greater South-South cooperation and triangular cooperation, including sharing of knowledge and best practices in order to address the incidence of corruption and illicit financial flows, which impede economic development, deepen inequality, and reduce the availability of financial resources for national development. Mr. Chairman, Ghana's economy, like many lower middle-income countries, faces challenges including constrained national financial resources to invest in development, infrastructural gaps, persistent inequalities, high dependence on export of raw natural resources, and unprocessed crops, effects of environmental degradation and climate change, as well as the burgeoning cohort of young people who must be absorbed into the workforce. Our medium-term development aspirations, as defined in the President's Coordinated Program of Economic and Social Development Policies 2017 to 2024, has identified a new direction for our country's development in creating the conditions for the Ghanaian private sector to propel growth and create employment opportunities. While not underestimating the importance of development assistance, the government of Ghana has defined the Ghana Beyond Aid policy for self-reliant growth and to break out of the mindset of dependency. This policy is to be founded on the creation of conditions that will foster private sector innovation, industrialization, and job growth. Ghana looks forward to forging strong partnerships in these efforts and believes that South-South cooperation provides a framework for providing private sector-led initiatives that can advance our development efforts. We've witnessed the success of the several vibrant and viable economic and business relationships forged at the bilateral level with many countries in the global south, who come to the table with their unique comparative advantage and emphasis on shared values, mutual interest, and understanding. We are determined to build upon these relationships to realize its full potential in meeting the socio-economic well-being and prosperity of our people. Mr. Chairman, in conclusion, I wish to urge that we strengthen our institutions to seriously address South-South cooperation and to fully integrate this approach in our various development strategies and policies. The stark reality of millions of people still living in extreme poverty around the world, rising inequality, and climate change are a matter of serious concern. Let us resolve individually and collectively to take the steps needed to enhance the effectiveness of South-South cooperation and partnerships to address these challenges. The hopes and aspirations of our peoples today and for succeeding generations rest upon us, and we must not fail. I thank you.
Doy gracias al
the communities they are meant to serve. We do not overlook or undervalue the financial challenges faced by developing countries and recognize that their external debt situation, particularly that of least developed countries, remains a major and serious concern. State-driven debt diplomacy creates dependencies that can eventually constitute a very real leverage that undermines a country's sovereignty. The United States believes development financing should not result in the accumulation of unsustainable debt, and recipients of such financing must retain sovereignty and control of their economies. This is why we insist upon quality standards for South-South cooperation, particularly where the UN plays a role. Processes and management structures must be transparent, fair, and accountable to each partner in order to maintain trust within a partnership. Finally, we continue to advocate for improvements and the ongoing reform process at the UN. We must uphold the highest standards of efficiency, effectiveness, transparency, and accountability to ensure good stewardship of the resources that we all invest in the UN development system. As we enter the next decade of South-South cooperation, I want to underscore that the United States looks forward to working together to build on the lessons learned and shared over the past 40 years. We commit to engage in additional triangular cooperation to support sustainable, market-oriented development that is rooted in concrete results and lifts communities and countries from poverty to prosperity on their journeys to self-reliance. Thank you.
I'd like to thank the representative of the United States of America. I now give the floor to the representative of the Syrian Arab Republic.
Thank you, Mr. President. My delegation aligns itself with the statement made by the Honorable Representative of Palestine on behalf of the G77 and China. I would like to express our deepest gratitude to the people and government of Argentina for hosting this important conference here in Buenos Aires. We come together today at the same place where we adopted the Buenos Aires Action Plan 40 years ago to objectively assess the progress that was achieved so far, to identify gaps and challenges, to strengthen South-South cooperation, and to enhance joint action among developing countries to implement the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda, especially poverty eradication. We realize that South-South cooperation is complementary to and not a substitute for North-South cooperation. However, the common development challenges that the Global South is facing and the basic principles related to the respect of sovereignty allows southern countries to achieve its development goals. Mr. President, South-South cooperation is a form of solidarity among the peoples of the South. It's a form of cooperation that allows them to achieve their national strategies and to achieve economic independence. This is why any financial contributions from other developing countries cannot be regarded as ODA. It is an expression of solidarity, an expression of cooperation guided by the respect for national sovereignty, national ownership, independence, equality, non-conditionality, and the non-interference of the internal affairs of states, and ensuring mutual benefits. We believe that South-South cooperation should enhance multilateralism in confronting development challenges, and it should allow developing countries to play a more active role in the decision-making processes at global level. This form of cooperation should support the efforts of these countries to achieve sustainable development. Mr. President, we believe in the importance of triangular cooperation in development cooperation projects and programs through the provision of financial and technical support and through the provision of expertise from the United Nations agencies and developed countries. However, triangular cooperation must be consistent with the principles of cooperation in the countries of the South and according to the policies and priorities of those countries. South-South cooperation and triangular cooperation significantly contribute in achieving sustainable development in developing countries. However, it is important to improve arrangements for commercial cooperation between or among the countries of the South that include preferential commerce and arrangements for investment. We call upon relevant United Nations organizations to continue to support developing countries in expanding commercial integration among countries of the South and ensuring regional economic integration and arrangements for cooperation. We stress once again the importance of taking a firm and clear stance against unilateral, coercive, economic, financial, or commercial measures, especially as those measures are not consistent with the principles of South-South cooperation. It runs counter to international law, the Charter of the United Nations, and those measures also obstruct economic and social development, especially in developing countries, including my country, Syria. We express our deep regret that the outcome document of this conference did not take into account the concerns of a number of member countries. The outcome document does not include a clear condemnation of the coercive unilateral measures and a demand to lift those measures. Those measures is a clear obstacle to reducing inequalities between countries. They obstruct the efforts of developing countries, especially countries in crises. They adversely affect implementation mechanisms and the establishment of global partnership to implement the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda, especially the goal of leaving no one behind. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the Syrian Arab Republic, and I now give the floor to the representative of the Solomon Islands.
Mr. President, thank you for hosting this conference and for the wonderful hospitality that was accorded to my delegation since our arrival. South-South and triangular cooperation are important for the Pacific. It is increasingly relevant for implementing the 2030 Agenda and must therefore be nurtured and sustained. Under the international development framework inspired by the 2030 Agenda, the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, the Paris Agreement, and the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, countries must enhance South-South and triangular cooperation to complement North-South cooperation. This will accelerate the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. But securing sustainable development in a small island developing state like mine, also an LDC, requires building resilience to withstand external shocks posed by climate change. For we bear disproportionate impacts of climate change, but severely constrained in our capacity to adapt and respond to the damage it causes. Our Secretary General was spot on this morning when he said that climate change is the defining issue of our time, and we are losing the race. For unless there is a fundamental shift in green funding and a fully resourced green climate fund, we will lose that race. South-South and triangular cooperation plays a vital role in supporting our countries, advance our climate actions for mitigation and adaptation. By increasing cooperation and sharing of knowledge among countries of the South, we provide more opportunities for them to benefit from practical solutions and build resilience against shocks and crises caused by climate change. The priority for South-South cooperation and engagement in the Pacific should focus on the implementation of the Sdgs accelerated modalities of action, Samoa Pathway. It highlights the role of South-South cooperation in advancing priority areas for sustainable development in LDCs and Sdgs. And it must embrace both intra-Pacific and inter-Sdgs collaboration. Leadership at all levels, regional, sub-regional, national, and subnational, is crucial for the success of South-South cooperation in the Pacific. Similarly, coordination is a prerequisite for effective implementation of South-South cooperation in my region. At our regional level, these coordinating roles shall be done by the Pacific Islands Development Forum in collaboration with UN agencies responsible for South-South cooperation. At the national level, this will be done by coordinating government institutions. Systematic, sustainable, and regional measurement of South-South cooperation is required to measure progress and relate the stories of South-South cooperation, and appropriate platforms for reporting are needed. The systems should be coherent and not duplicate existing work. They should be demand-driven, bottom-up, and people-centered for the purposes of sustainability, and people-to-people exchanges should be embraced. For the Pacific, there is a need to strike a balance between learning from outside and nurturing homegrown approaches. If principles of South-South cooperation are fully applied, there should be mutual benefits for all parties. Despite huge potential, South-South cooperation in technologies for adaptation remains largely untapped. LDCs and SIDS can benefit from catalyzing South-South cooperation for technologies for adaptation through promoting use of local knowledge and technology, capacity development, and upscaling of successful initiatives. Trade is crucial for economic growth, creating jobs and progress to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. But despite huge trade potentials, LDCs and SIDS are still marginalized in global trade and trapped in the downstream of global value chain. With fast-growing economies of developing countries, South-South trade cooperation is instrumental in providing access to additional markets for LDCs and SIDS. This would allow them to harness the development benefits of trade, and many developing countries are providing duty-free and quota-free market access for goods and services of LDCs. Other developing countries in a position to do so could also do the same to LDCs. And we are lagging behind in science, technology, and innovation, STI. These are key drivers of structural transformation and human and social development. Meanwhile, developing countries have built up significant STI knowledge, resources, and capacity. South-South cooperation can be further deployed to scale up transfer and adoption of science and technology and improve the innovation capacity of least developed countries and small island developing states. My delegation endorses our outcome document of the second UN high-level conference on South-South cooperation and looks forward to its successful implementation. I thank you, Mr. President.
Agradecemos.
Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, this is a great honor to represent the Islamic Republic of Iran in this second high-level conference on South-South cooperation in this beautiful city of Buenos Aires. We are grateful to the people and the government of Argentina for warm hospitality extended to the delegations and to the United Nations, particularly UN Office for South-South Cooperation, the co-facilitators, and the permanent missions in New York for excellent preparation for the conference. My delegation associates itself with the statement made by Distinguished Minister of Palestine on behalf of the G77 and China. Mr. President, the UN engagement in the development of the South runs for decades now. The post-BAPA 40-year period and its preceding 2 decades of 60s and 70s witnessed a series of paradigms taken one after another towards development of the developing world. These paradigm shifts were mainly driven by mainstream policies of the North. The North-South development paradigm proved to be far less yielding than expected, for whatever reasons that I am not going to elaborate. One may claim that the South-South paradigm was given birth to remedy the shortcomings of the North-South one. Notwithstanding we are not supporting this contention, it is obvious that there have been tendencies to replace commitment-based North-South context with voluntary in-house South-South cooperation. We do believe in the continued relevance and value of the South-South cooperation for the current development paradigm. However, this should not lead to a kind of policy space for the North to deviate from its pivotal role in upgrading the international cooperation for development. Mr. President, distinguished delegates, let me highlight, as highlighted by UN Secretary General in his opening remarks this morning, the important role of the multilateral institutions, including the United Nations, in enhancing South-South cooperation. Multilateralism is not a choice today, rather a must, particularly in the SDG era. Any attempt to water down the indisputable value of multilateralism is not endangers, among others, national and international efforts to sustainable development. Equally important is the disruptive impacts of unilateralism, including through unilateral sanctions on the international cooperation for development and on South-South cooperation. Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, amid the rampant unilateral sanctions, the Islamic Republic of Iran has continued its active engagement with the multilateral institutions for the sake of sustainable development of its people and the people of our region and beyond. As regards upgrading the prospects for enhanced South-South cooperation, we have expanded our partnership with UN system, including through UN Office for South-South Cooperation. We have recently organized a joint symposium with UN OSSC to raise further awareness at the multi-stakeholder level about the imperative of South-South on triangular cooperation. We will jointly continue efforts to enhance our national and institutional capacities, to better share our experiences and capacities with our partners in the South. To conclude, Mr. President, let me assure our fellow partners in the South of our continued support for efforts to make South-South cooperation a remarkable and successful enterprise. I thank you for your attention.
I thank the representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran, and I would invite the representative of Yemen to take the floor.
Mr. President, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, at the outset, I extend my thanks to the government and people of Argentina for this excellent organization of the conference. I also thank United Nations Office for South-South Cooperation. President, this conference coincides with the 40th anniversary of the United Nations Conference of 1979 on technical cooperation among developing countries that adopted Buenos Aires Action Plan, BAPA, to implement and promote technical cooperation among the developing countries. And with the adoption of Sustainable Development Agenda 2030, that is a roadmap for humanity to achieve common aspirations, our conference should focus on the role of South-South cooperation in implementing the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. And we should also consider the significant challenges and obstacles to the implementation of the agenda and the opportunities that can be availed by developing countries. South-South cooperation is of special importance for developing countries in general and least developed countries for many reasons. This includes the fact that developing countries are more capable of understanding the needs and situation as well as the priorities of least developed countries given similar socioeconomic and geographical situation. So we believe that success stories and expertise should be shared to contribute to overcoming challenges in least developed countries to accelerate implementation of 2030 agenda and achieving the ultimate goal, which is not to leave anyone behind. President, despite the importance of South-South cooperation, we should stress that it complements rather than substitutes North-South cooperation or triangle cooperation. And while there are increasing challenges and obstacles to multilateralism, this year we'll see a number of important events and conferences, such as the Sustainable Development Summit, the Climate Summit, and high-level event on financing development, and the high-level political forum on implementing 2030 agenda that will be held twice this year, in July by ECOSOC and in September by the General Assembly. Therefore, the high-level conference on South-South cooperation is a start of this momentous year that is full of conferences that we hope will be successful and fruitful and that will contribute to acceleration of the implementation of SDGs that we agreed on in 2015. President, my country is going through catastrophic humanitarian situation as a result of the coup staged by the Houthi militias that are supported by Iran. The coup against constitutional legitimacy and the political transition sponsored by the United Nations and the countries of the region, as well as the outcome of a comprehensive national dialogue that was agreed by all Yemenis of all stripes. Houthi militias in September 2014 have controlled at gunpoint all institutions and government offices in Sana'a, the capital, and then they continued their control over other provinces. They have wreaked havoc everywhere. The economic situation and living situation of the Yemeni people have deteriorated, as well as the economic downturn, the economic accumulative economic downturn in 2014, 2015, and 2016 reached 47%. The general budget of the state has deteriorated as well, and we have stopped paying salaries. Houthi militias continue to destroy infrastructure, and this has led to capital flight. The development has also stopped, and all production, economic, and development institutions have been destroyed, along with health facilities. Epidemics have increased, and food insecurity has rocketed to reach the famine level in some provinces. Despite all these horrendous economic indicators and the repeated warnings of total collapse of the remaining national economy and going into a full famine, the Houthi militias have continued to tamper with state resources. They have pillaged the reserves of the central bank that used to be $5 billion. They used such to wage a war against the Yemeni people. They have also imposed royalties and tax under different names, such as religious celebrations, such as the birth of the Prophet, Ashura, and other celebrations. Houthi militias are also corrupt, and they control anything to do with imports or distribution of basic services, fuel, power plant, generating financial resources also through management of black markets. Despite the success by the Yemeni government to recover 80% of the territory of the country, but the devastation of infrastructure and national institutions was much bigger than the modest capacity of the government. And in this respect, I I seize this opportunity to call on all donor countries, in particular friends and brethren from the South, to render support and assistance to the efforts of the government to rebuild the capacity of the state and its institution and to rehabilitate infrastructure. Thank you, Mr. President.
I'd like to thank the representative of Yemen, and I now give the floor to the representative of Andorra.
Señor Presidente.
President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to begin this statement by thanking the Republic of Argentina for their excellent organization of this major conference 40 years after the adoption of the Buenos Aires Plan of Action. In the same vein, I wish to extend my congratulations to the permanent representatives of Lithuania and Uganda to the United Nations for their work in facilitating the negotiations of the outcome document that we are adopting this week. Without doubt, this represents a landmark in international cooperation for development. The 2030 Agenda recognizes the outstanding role of South-South and triangular cooperation in achieving its goals and targets. It is a tool of paramount importance for the attainment of the SDGs. Proof of this is the fact that it has been growing in relevance over the last few years in all regions of the world. There are manifold advantages of this form of cooperation. Among these, South-South and triangular cooperation is a demonstration of solidarity and partnerships that promote governance mechanisms and horizontal decision-making mechanisms, enabling in this way the full achievement of Goal 17 of the agenda. The Principality of Andorra fully acknowledges in its annual master plan for international cooperation the importance of South-South and triangular cooperation as a complementary modality to traditional cooperation. In this sense, Andorra joined in July 2018 the Ibero-American Program for the Strengthening of South-South Cooperation. This program has major mechanisms and tools which, inter alia, contribute to bolstering institutions and to training human resources that implement this type of cooperation. Andorra will this year implement, together with Uruguay, its first structured mechanism for the exchange of experiences on South-South cooperation. The Ibero-American program, together with the Ibero-American Secretary General, are doing a great deal to systematize the South-South cooperation in Ibero-America. And here, deserving of specific mention, is the report on South-South cooperation in Ibero-America, coordinated by the Ibero-American Secretary General. In its 11 editions, it has collated information on around 8,000 South-South and triangular cooperation projects. Excellencies, South-South and triangular cooperation is an innovative modality for cooperation which calls for partnerships among numerous and diverse actors, which facilitates the search for new forms and has generated a suitable framework for the emergence of new initiatives. Moreover, South-South and triangular cooperation represents a singular strategic opportunity to share good experiences and knowledge in addressing climate change, new technologies, science, and innovation. The Principality of Andorra is, during 2019 and 2020, serving as the pro tempore secretariat of the Ibero-American Conference. This period will culminate in the holding of the 27th Summit of Heads of State and Government of Ibero-American countries in Andorra in November 2020. Our motto is Innovation for Sustainable Development, Goal 2030. This is a motto which seeks to boost innovation in favor of sustainable development in its three dimensions: the economic, social, and environmental. Innovation understood as all change that is more than simply technological, based on knowledge that is more than simply scientific, and which generates value that is more than simply economic. Definitively, innovation in favor of sustainable development, in favor of reducing poverty and inequalities. Excellencies, I would also like to underscore the work of the United Nations to promote South-South and triangular cooperation. In this vein, the Principality of Andorra believes in the crucial role of inclusive multilateralism, which makes it possible for us to resolve together the problems that affect us all, but to also adopt solutions that leave no one behind. The United Nations Sustainable Development Programme for 2030 commits us to forge multi-sectoral partnerships specifically among small and medium-sized enterprises and small local agricultural producers. It is there that our efforts must be made to guarantee, inter alia, training projects for all stakeholders that represent the foundation of the economy of our countries. In closing, President, I would like to note the undeniable role of South-South and triangular cooperation in promoting gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls. The gender perspective must be considered as cross-cutting in any debate on sustainable development. Indeed, the implementation of policies in favor of gender equality is also essential to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you very much, President. I'd like to thank the representative of Andorra, and I would now like to give the floor to the representative of Namibia, who will be the final speaker of the general debate in this meeting.
Mr. President, thank you for the opportunity to contribute to this general debate on the role of South-South cooperation and the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, the challenges and opportunities. Allow me also to join others who have spoken before me to express our heartfelt appreciation to the government and great people of this beautiful country of Argentina for the outstanding warmth and hospitality and steadfast support for the further strengthening and success of the noble objectives of the Buenos Aires Plan of Action and deepening of South-South and triangular cooperation. 29 years ago, on the 21st of March 1990, the international community assembled in the city of Windhoek, the capital of Namibia, to witness the birth of my country. We look back today with deep gratitude for the selfless contributions, support, and perhaps most of all, for the unconditional solidarity the people of Namibia enjoyed from so many amongst the international community through outstanding initiatives and bodies such as the South-South Cooperation, the Non-Aligned Movement, and numerous other committed partners in support of the right to self-determination and independence and bringing an end to colonialism. Sadly, we are reminded that that struggle is not yet completed as we think of the people of Palestine and the people of the Western Sahara that we are hoping would get their day to exercise their right to self-determination. We regard our country as a child of international solidarity, midwifed by the United Nations and raised with the support of the international community. And we are most grateful for the progress we have achieved along the way through these partnerships. I therefore wish to share a few thoughts, experiences, and input from my country to the discussion here today. Mr. President, we live in a world faced with new challenges from climate, the environment, land degradation, desertification, our oceans, our riverbeds, issues of migration, and challenges to how we trade and do business with each other that cause significant hurdles not only on our development progress, but have the potential to impact on peace and security in so many parts of the world. For if there is no meaningful changes in the quality of lives of people through food security, decent jobs, jobs for our youth, women and young people, housing, health, education and general well-being, we will continue to be confronted with the threats to peace, stability, development and security.
Namibia is committed to play a constructive role in helping the global community find lasting and durable solutions to these serious challenges standing in the way of bringing much-needed development and prosperity to the countries of the South and indeed the world over. On our part, through the implementation of our development plans, Namibia aims to redistribute wealth meaningfully in order to yield transformation that can correct historical injustices. We subscribe fully to the UN Agenda for Development through the implementation and attainment of the Sustainable Development Goals as set out in Agenda 2030, as well as in Agenda 2063 of the African Union. Namibia is underway towards addressing several socioeconomic challenges, such as income disparities, high unemployment, and the existence of pockets of poverty through our development trajectory and strategies as outlined in our Vision 2030, our 5-year national development plans, and our Harambee Prosperity Plan. Harambee is a Swahili word meaning that we should all pull together in the same direction. My delegation will be happy to share the details of these plans with interested delegates. I wish to extend the Namibian government's gratitude to all development partners, including UN entities, for their continuing technical and financial support towards eradicating poverty in all its forms and dimensions encapsulated in our sector-specific policies and programs. It is imperative for us, South countries, to continue harnessing these relations in order to consolidate and cement our economic and technical cooperation. Mr. President, South-South cooperation, being a conduit for development through sharing of technical knowledge and skills and technologies, contributes towards the improvement of the socio-economic status of the people of the Global South. It is for this reason that 3 years ago, Namibia signed a tripartite agreement on South-South cooperation with the government of the People's Republic of China and the Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO. The agreement commenced in 2015 and ended in 2017, and it was aimed at boosting food security. Today, we are delighted that the first phase of the project has been implemented and yielded tangible positive results. The second phase of the FAO China-Namibia South-South Cooperation Project is ongoing. Mr. President, although anti-globalization sentiments and protectionist rhetoric seem to be permeating the current global political climate, Namibia remains positive that our political commitment to promote greater South-South cooperation, we will deliver on the promise of growth and a better quality of life for our people. This will require the sharing of knowledge and experiences, training technology, transfer, and in-kind contributions. My delegation reaffirms its commitment to the principles governing South-South cooperation. At the same time, Namibia concurs that South-South cooperation is a complement to and not a substitute for North-South cooperation. In conclusion, I would like to emphasize the central role South-South and triangular cooperation play in eradicating poverty, including extreme poverty. Let me echo in this regard the words of our founding president, His Excellency Sam Nujoma, who said, and I quote, "Our planet Earth is too small to perpetuate the unacceptable coexistence of abject poverty and abundance of prosperity within its fold. We will only deal with this situation effectively when we promote mutually beneficial commercial trade between the North and South within the framework of North-South and South-South cooperation," end of quote. It is in this spirit that Namibia is open for business that would see much needed value addition to our natural resources and lead to mutually beneficial development, progress, and prosperity between partnering countries, businesses, institutions, and peoples. I thank you.
I thank the delegate from Namibia. Distinguished delegates, we have heard the last speaker in the general debate for this meeting. As I'm told by the Secretariat of the conference for tomorrow, there will still be around 70 speakers left. Therefore, we would be grateful for the goodwill of all delegates to observe the speaking time for each delegate of 5 minutes so that we can progress in our work tomorrow and to ensure that everyone has the 5-minute time period to make their statement. And we recall the comment that has been made throughout today in that we invite delegates to please abbreviate their statements and circulate full copies to the Secretariat. And I have a second note from the Secretariat of the conference here as well. I don't think we'll need to reach that point that is setting a time limit where we will have to switch off the delegate's microphone. I hope we will be able to avoid such an extreme measure. But we do have around 70 speakers left, and that alone tells us of the need to ensure cooperation from all delegates in respecting the 5-minute time limit. We shall continue the general debate tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. in this same hall. The meeting is adjourned.